My name's Niel Hancock. I feel like I'm in the interrogation room. We need some bright lights and somebody whooping me with nylon baton. The memories. Yeah, it's a whole lot more fun to be talking about all that stuff on this end of it, that's for sure. And when John was talking about El Paso, I guess there's for everybody that's sitting in this room in your chair, there's a little guiding angel sitting on your shoulder. You may not have noticed it, but it's there, otherwise you wouldn't be here. I for a long time just thought it was sheer dumb luck. And when I start looking at the quote-unquote coincidences of what got me here, the evidence stacks up to the fact that there's a boss, there's whatever you want to call a guiding light, some sort of cosmic force that rides in your hip pocket, whether you think that or not. And like John, and I can always tell the severe, extreme cases end up in El Paso. It's like, if you're a crook and you end up in Alcatraz. Somebody tells me they ended up, and not just El Paso, but anybody in West Texas, anywhere. It's a pretty rough bunch, but loving and kind, that was my first introduction to tough love. The guy that got me to my first meeting was a man that I had burned for a bunch of money. It wasn't his money, it was illicit drug money. And it ended up with him in his pocket, and then he was my friend, so I thought, well, I'll use a little of this too. So I dipped into the pool and took some of the bread and made an escape. Was living at the time in Virgin Islands in St. Thomas. It was imperative that I get off the rock because the feds were looking for me because of, as they said, a lot of missing explosives. I didn't think that it was that much, but it was like 6 boxes of dynamite that we'd lifted off the airport extension project in St. Thomas, and my friend who was the cohort in that had been a French Foreign Legionnaire at Dien Bien Phu in Vietnam. So we'd gotten together because we were buddies from Vietnam, different countries, different times. And he had some idea about taking all those explosives down to Guadeloupe, and there was talk of a revolution to get the French island independent. So we thought this will be a great idea. And now all of this stuff, whenever we were sitting up at Fearless Fred's bar knocking them back, it just seemed so romantic. It was going to be a romantic, wonderful kind of thing that would be a big adventure. Shortly after the explosives disappeared, there were a whole lot of guys with white sidewall haircuts and suits, which gave away the fact they didn't belong in the islands. And they were all packing a lot of heat, and they were looking around for whoever lifted these boxes of dynamite. So I borrowed the money from my friend. I thought he'd want to contribute to my happiness, and hightailed it out to the deserts out and ended up in Chihuahua, and that's how I got out there to that place. It was one of those coincidences that I didn't know was a coincidence until it happened. And living out there in the Chihuahuan desert was just one romantic ideal after another. Like I would come to in a bar, these little cantinas that were around out there, out of a blackout, and wonder how I got there, what had happened, why is everybody on the floor looking scared shitless. And then I looked down in a model 1911 .45 automatic. When you fired the last round, locks open, and I've got a locked open pistol in my hand. And the smell of cordites in the room, and fortunately I was so drunk, of course I couldn't hit anybody. And I had no idea why that had happened at all. And there was this one place I hung out, had this wonderful little Mexican woman who was brave enough to not paying attention to the fact that I was just a shit-covered raving maniac gringo coming into her place. And she would waddle over and take the pistol out of my hand and give me an enchilada to eat, and pat me on the back. And I didn't see that coincidence either, that I was landed in a place that was safe no matter what kind of bizarre behavior I was exhibiting. And the local sheriff was a wonderful fellow named Victor Ochoa. And Victor was aware of the fact that there were a bunch of raving loonies that lived in his patch. And there were a few other Vietnam vets and a few other just regular people that lived out there in that part of the country. And we had this game where we would sit at this bar called Bar, which was exactly a mile from Interstate 10. And we'd got a snoot full, and we'd bring some hardware over, and we'd sit out in chairs in front of the bar. And we all had a lot of hardware. I had a .30 caliber carbine that had been converted full automatic, and I had a whole bunch of tracer rounds. So we'd sit in chairs out in front of the bar, and we'd watch truck traffic up there, and we would see how close we could get around to truck traffic up on I-10. And tracer rounds at night is real spectacular, especially if you're sitting on the end where they're coming at you. And we'd sit out there, and of course a trucker would immediately call in like, hey, there's somebody shooting at the interstate. And a few minutes later we'd see Victor Ochoa coming in, and he was a smart sheriff. He would just pull up and roll the window down and say, you boys quit that shit. And we'd say, okay, Vic, oh, sorry. And we'd put everything away and quit. He knew how to handle this stuff. And those were like evenings of entertainment. Blackouts, endless blackouts. And I still didn't see the coincidence of why I had ended up out in this really desolate area until my friend that I'd stolen the money from called and said, I'm coming through El Paso. I'd like for you to meet me at the airport. Well, in my mind, I immediately thought he's coming for his money, and I'm in deep trouble, and because I didn't have any money. And I thought, okay, well, this is good. It was kind of a relief to get this out. And so my friend arrived on the airplane on the night designated. I drove for the El Paso airport, picked him up, and when he walked off the airplane, there was something magically different about him. I didn't recognize what, but there was something different outwardly and inwardly. And he said, well, it's good to see you. let's get in the car and, take me home. We've got a lot to talk about. Well, I thought he was going to talk about where you're going to get my money from and when you're going to get it. And on the way home, he started in on what we now know as making amends to people. Like, he started in telling me how sorry he was that we had been in all the trouble, that we had all this stuff that had gone on with us. And, it disarmed me totally, because I had no idea. I wasn't ready for him to start talking about stuff that he'd done to me. And I was disarmed by it, and he kept mentioning all these things that we hear every night when the meeting starts, the steps and all this stuff. And I had no idea what he was talking about, of course. So when we got all the way back to where we were staying, he said, I've got to go to a meeting tomorrow night in El Paso. I need you to take me. I immediately built a huge resentment. God damn it, I don't want to take him, blah, 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 this whole routine. And the next day rolls around, and he tells me, now we're going to this address, and it's in El Paso. Well, I still had no idea what he was talking about. So in my mind, I immediately thought, better go prepared. So I have a sawed-off shotgun, that .30 caliber carbine in the back seat. I've got the .45 auto, and a lot of rounds of ammunition, just in case we have to shoot our way out of somewhere. So we get to this church. It was a parsonage, and we pull up in the front, and he said, well, let me go in. I got to go check and see if it's an open meeting. And he goes in and comes back out, and he said, well, it's a closed meeting, so you can't come in tonight, but I'll be here for an hour. So he goes back in. Well, I drive around and I park the car and I sneak back into the bushes in front of this little place, and I'm peeking into this meeting, and it's a group of people just like this, and here's my friend sitting with all these people laughing, carrying on. Here I am out there in the bushes, I've got all my hardware, I'm ready to shoot him out of there in case we're in trouble. And I thought, boy, this is weird, another coincidence, the big guy kind of softening me up, because I'm looking at all this stuff going on inside there. We drive home, and he says, well, we need to go back tomorrow night because it's an open meeting and you can go with me. I know you're not an alcoholic, but if you want to understand me, then I'd really like for you to come. So the next night, I drove him back down there, get out of the car, and all of a sudden, walking up to that meeting at the Alano Club in El Paso, I had the black dog fear. I mean, it scared me shitless. I had no idea why. Just the knot in my gut. And we go through the door, and we go in and sit down, and there's this fella that is sitting at the table that has a big pistolero mustache, and he's got that look. I know this is one badass dude, and I knew that if I'm going to go around alcoholics that are like the people that I was known to, hang around with, I better go armed. So I have a .45 automatic in my belt under my shirt. Go in and sit down, and this fella with the big pistolero mustache is sitting across the table, and he's looking at me, he's glaring at me. And I'm armed and I'm afraid of this dude, I mean, he was badass looking. And he reached in his pocket and he pulled out $1.25 and shoved it across the table to me and said, why don't you just go on across the street and get yourself a six-pack? You don't have guts enough to make this outfit. And he read my mail exactly right. He pissed me off, Up yours, I'm not leaving. I'm bolted to that chair. I mean, I'm all ready to defend my turf. And then the meeting starts. Like John says, you never know what's going to happen when the gate opens and you come out of the chute in this outfit. Meeting starts. Everybody goes around, everybody's sharing. When it comes to this mean-ass looking guy, he shares about getting sober in Huntsville. He got sober in the pen. And then at a year sober, they deported him to Mexico, where he was waiting to bushwhack me. And meeting ends. This guy comes around and he says, I want to see you back here tomorrow night without drinking or doing any kind of drugs. I'm going to find where you're living down in that shithole in Chihuahua and break your fingers one by one. And I knew this guy would do it, and I've been coming back ever since. And he's been dead for 7 years. But Benny also told me, I'm going to show you how to live. I'm going to show you how to do this. When we read the stuff off the wall, the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, he said, I'm going to show you how to do all this stuff. And I had to go. His business, his family owned wrecking yards in Mexico, and he had this wrecking yard in Juarez. His house was 2 old Packards welded together, and the disease of alcoholism is always very interesting in the information it gives you, because my head's telling me, what does this guy know? I mean, he can barely speak English. You're an educated man, blah, 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 blah. What does this guy know? And it was going on, but I was so afraid of Benny that I drove down to Juarez and went to the junkyard and got in the Packards. And he said, now we're going to write a 4th step. I had no idea what that was, but I was afraid of Benny, and I did it. And then he informed me we were going to do a 5th step, and same thing. I was terrified to tell anybody all of these so-called secrets that we carry around. And it was one of those things that began to lighten the load. I began to see how things might be a little bit different. But all those coincidences that ended me up out there in that part of the country really kind of set me up for the deal where you suddenly one day get it, you get what's going on and what kind of gift you've got and why it is that those little angels sit on your shoulder, whether you're aware of them or not. I was thinking, I just got back off a long motorbike trip out west, and I was through that part of the country and saw some of the relics of the wreck of the past that are still out there. And it's interesting how those things become reinforcers for keeping you over on this side of the track. The different kinds of things that keep you here instead of letting you slip back off somewhere. And I've always been really lucky in that I'm around meetings where there's people who still have what I want and who still make me want to be sober for one more day. going back down to the island sober was really a funny kind of, it was one of those litmus tests of whether or not this outfit really works. And my then wife and I got on the plane, we flew down to St. Thomas, and my sponsor in Virginia Beach, where we were living at the time, because I was telling him I'm a little nervous about stepping back into places where I'd been drinking, been in a lot of trouble. And he said, well, simple, just buy a round trip ticket, you know, and if you get off and it's weird, get back on the next plane and come back. And that wasn't a problem, because when I got down there to this place where I, you know, thought, boy, this is as grim as it can get. And what I found was the place was really beautiful, that I really liked that area. I like to do the things that are down there, sailing and diving. It, like all of America's paradises, there's always flies in the ointment, but it's a beautiful place, and it really was an interesting episode. I went out sailing with this woman that had this beautiful Southern Ocean racing circuit yacht. She was a terrible drunk. Her husband was a terrible drunk. And we went out on this boat, I'll do. And my job always before, aside from being regular crew to sail the boat, one of my jobs was to go downstairs and get her drinks, and her drink was my drink. Mountain gave rum and water. So I go down below and I'm mixing this drink, and the smell of the rum and all of those things, it's like in the book where they talk about you got to be spiritually right every day to be protected. And Benny had laid on me a long, long time before that, like in one of those episodes where we're in the Packards in the Juarez junkyard. Hit your knees every morning, and his advice to me, and I've always remembered it as, dear Benny's God, please give it to me clean and straight. Dear Benny's God, thanks. And that always, when you're really in a world of hurt and alligators up to your ass, is a good prayer, you know. And I fall back on it even to this day. But there I am, I'm down below in the boat, I'm mixing this Mount Gay and water. The smell hits, and it's just like being in the room with like those horror stories where hands come out of nowhere and they're going to go for your throat. I'm looking at this glass full of rum just coming up to my mouth, you know, and I've got no control over this arm, and it gets up about this high and stops. And the moment passed, and that was it. Then I knew I'll be safe anywhere. You know, this outfit really works, and it's such a oddball little thing. You know, I've got a good friend in California, Bill Mack. He came to the program from South Philly, and I never was tough. I was never a tough guy. I protected myself by being crazy. Nobody would know what was going to happen next. And like the Indians left crazies alone, but Bill was tough, a tough guy. And he came to his first meetings. Everybody looked at him and were horrified because this guy, his office equipment was a snub-nosed .38 and a spring-loaded blackjack. That's the way he worked, and everybody was afraid that there wasn't anybody in AA there in Hollywood at the Rodeo Drive meeting that was tough enough to actually be his sponsor or carry a message to him that was going to work. And about the fourth or fifth meeting there in that little circle of meetings, they had a big birthday party one night, and there it's a deal where everybody, what they call, takes a cake. If it's your birthday, they call out your name and you come up and blow out the candle on the cake, and everybody who's celebrating birthdays does that. Well, so this Wendell was a transvestite who was a clothing maker for the movies. He made all the costumes and everything for Paramount Theater. So every time that he had a birthday, he would dress up as the woman out of Gone with the Wind. I mean, he would have on this elaborate gear. And he was at this meeting and celebrating a birthday in one of these wonderful outfits. And Bill was sitting in the back and was making all this noise and everything. So as Wendell is coming back from the podium, she stops and says, "I'm your sponsor, honey. I want to talk to you after the meeting." And everybody just fell dead silent because they're thinking, oh, shit, this is really going to trigger it. And Bill didn't say a word. After the meeting was over, we look outside, and here is Bill Mack, this tough South Philly guy, over in the corner with Wendell in this great, wonderful, magnificent dress from this thing. And Wendell became his sponsor. Wendell was Bill Mack's sponsor. And nobody would ever say a word detrimental to Wendell, or they had Bill to answer for. And what goes around comes around in this thing. There's always the deal of you give it away to keep it. And I forget how Bill must have 35 years by now. And I remember being in a meeting one night, another one of those Tony meetings in Hollywood, and there's a guy there stumbles in off the street, roaring drunk, got a brown sack full of wine, and there's a very well-dressed woman from Brentwood that's talking that night. And this guy's sitting in the back making all kinds of noise and, up yours, you don't know what you're talking about. And Bill went back and sat down next to the guy. Well, and he still keeps making noise, and there's 4 or 5 people that are coming over to get this guy, and they're going to take him out. They're going to 86 him. Bill says, no, he's okay, he's fine. The guy makes a lot of noise. Well, that night, the guy has no place to stay, so Bill takes him home. In the middle of the night, the guy gets up and comes into his bedroom and goes after him with a butcher knife. Bill breaks the guy's arm in 3 places. Guy's in the hospital in a body cast, and Bill's going up there to see him every night. His sponsor, Bill's his sponsor. And that guy's still sober. That guy got sober. So it's always those little coincidences, those little things that really kind of get your mind working. You got a real funny sense of that, and I found over the years AA is it's when I was a kid, I always wondered, I would go to see these serials on Saturday morning. When I was growing up, it was cowboy stuff, Tom Mix, Roy Rogers, all that, and boy, it just looked so good. I always wanted to be riding with those guys, ride with the white hats, ride with the good guys. But it's very hard to find an outfit like that. out here in the world. You know, just when I would get to the place where I think I'd gotten it, I'd found it, it would evaporate or go away, and the next thing you know, you're back out, you know, still not belonging to the right thing. And when I hit this outfit, it really started to be the kind of place that I always wanted to hang with. You know, I look around rooms and I think, you know, this is about as odd a mix of people as you're ever going to find anywhere in the world. And yet we all have the same thing in common. You know, we're here in the lifeboat, and it makes a really funny kind of glue that keeps us going. I was watching a program the other night, and it was like one of these forensic science things. They were going along with this murder mystery, and you know, and I started thinking, you know, it's the oddest thing how we live in this world that nobody was ever able to figure out. You know, I drank and drugged because, you know, that's what I did to try to figure out how we get out in the world and do these kinds of tricks. And my wife and I were talking about how odd it is that you get sober and you go along and your life takes on a whole different kind of twist. It makes, you know, the old 180-degree kind of turn from where we were when we started coming around here. And those coincidences that, you know, kind of seemed very strange to me when I was early on in the program, now have kept coming around until I can see what's happened, why I'm still here. When I was living in the islands, there was I turned 33 this year, and I remember thinking, God damn, that's a lot of time. But when I was still living in St. Thomas, there was a guy and his wife who came from Rye, New York, and Walter had the same amount of time, 30-some-odd years. When that happened, I was about 7 or 8 years sober. And when my then wife and I got to St. Thomas, that gave the little AA group there on St. Thomas enough people to have a meeting every day of the week. Well, I drew Sunday, and Sunday I would go down to Calvin Hall, and I would make a 30-cup pot of coffee. I'd get the big book out. I'd set all the chairs up around the table, and I would wait. You know, I would have the meeting already. Weeks went by, nobody showed up. It's just me and 30 cups of coffee. Well, of course I drank it, you know, so I would be completely speed, you know. Jesus, you know, but I got a chance to read the big book, so I'm reading a lot of this stuff over and over. And I'm thinking, man, how come I drew Sunday? I mean, this is really cheesy. I mean, they gave me Sunday. And so one day, weeks and weeks have gone by, I'm making the 30 cups of coffee, get the big book out, and this native guy walks in, and it's a guy that I know from the old days. He's a total raving maniac. And his deal at that time was tourists would be sitting in the little waterfront saloons, and the guy's name was Raffy. And Raffy would come in with this overcoat, and he'd walk up to a table and like he's going to flash somebody. Well, he had on a swimsuit and a T-shirt, but the tourists would all draw back, and then he'd grab the change off the table for the drinks. He had a good racket going. And everybody was terrified of him because you never knew what he was going to do. And he had a little machete about this long. He had a leather band, and he wore it always had it, this little machete. And so it's him, it's Rafi. He comes into my Sunday meeting and comes in, sits down, and he gets a little machete out, and he starts just whittling on the edge of the table, whack, whack, whack. I mean, he's whittling the edge of the table off. And I said, well, Rafi, you want some coffee? And he said, no, I want a drink. And I start in on my AA spiel, well, this is where we learn how not to drink. Whack, 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 whack. I said, okay, Rafi, just a minute. I'm going around the corner. I'll buy you some rum. I'll be right back. Whack, 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 whack. So I get up, I run around the corner, I buy him a fifth of Old St. Croix, which is a kind of rum that you wouldn't even burn in your Bunsen burner. It's bad. So I buy the bottle, I come back around, and I'm thinking, this isn't kosher, but I don't want to die either. So I put the bottle of rum down. Well, Rafi tones down. He stops whacking on the table, rips it open, pops the thing, and he said, well, read me something. So I'm reading him the big book. He's knocking back this Old St. Croix. And I'm reading the big book to him. But he didn't whack, whack, whack anymore. It came time for the meeting to end. I said, well, that's it, Rafi. See you next Sunday. So, he finishes off the bottle, gets up. I said, you want to say a prayer? We always end up with a prayer. So, Rafi and I are standing there doing the Lord's Prayer, and he leaves. And next week, here comes Rafi. Rafi comes back. I go next door, buy the bottle. He sits down there, I read him some of the book. Well, okay, this guy, Walter, with the 30-some-odd years, hears the rumor that I'm buying booze for a drunk. Okay. Walter assembles the troops. He gets all of the rest of the sober members of the enclave there in St. Thomas, and they all arrive on Sunday for my meeting gone bad. The road meeting. And Walter is sitting there right next to me, and we're, talking, and he's saying, I just can't believe you've actually done this. It's just, I'm really disappointed in you, Neil. Well, Rafi comes in. Rafi gets there for the meeting. Well, Rafi sits over between Walter and Walter's wife. And everybody's around. Everybody's looking at old Rafi. Rafi's looking around. And out comes the machete. Whack, 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 whack. And Walter looks over at me and he said, better go get him the bottle. I went around the corner and buy the bottle for Rafi. Okay, so time goes on. I have to come back to the States. I'm gone for about 7 or 8 months. These coincidences are always funny. You never know what's going to trigger a sober soul. You never know what's going to happen. I go back to the islands. I go into the meeting at Calvin Hall, and everybody's come in. I'm a little late, and there's this guy sitting at the end of the table that keeps looking at me, and I'm thinking, Kyle, where do I know this guy from? I see him in New York. I mean, where does this guy come from? And I couldn't place him. After the meeting, this guy comes over. I mean, it was a shock. It was Rafi. I mean, Rafi cleaned up, sober, and it was startling. you know, and we talked, and he said, you know, if you hadn't kept buying me those bottles, I wouldn't have kept coming back. And I thought, well, I was just trying to protect myself. I just wanted to live one more day. You know, I mean, I wasn't doing any 12-step work. I was just looking at sheer survival, you know, with this thing. So you never can tell what funny coincidence is going to take place where you either end up in the outfit, just like me, suddenly ending up out there in Chihuahua. Thank heavens for my friend Frenchie and I, and stealing all the dynamite and having to make a run for the border. And my friend who got me sober, that took me to those meetings, is I call him a drip dry. You know, he can stay sober for 3 or 4 years at a time, but something will happen. He'll go off on. He's a musician and was a famous guy, and he'll go off on these things where, like cruise boats that have nostalgia cruises. So he goes off with the mamas and papas, and what happens to him is, like the last time he was in New Orleans, and he was down there in the Preservation Hall, jazz band was playing, and off he went, and he missed the boat, and they had to go without him. And you know, they finally told him, look, you gotta stay sober or we're gonna find somebody else to do the gig. And he can quote you the big book backwards and forwards. He can give you all of the good reasons to get sober and to come in here, but he can't stay sober himself. And I talk to him all the time, you know, and always somewhere in the course of the conversation, he will say, are you still going to meetings? And I'll say, yeah, I'm still going to meetings. And he's baffled by that in a funny kind of way, but I keep thinking maybe he's just missed the boat on coincidences, the fact that he got it, but he can't keep it. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that no meetings. He doesn't come around the meetings. He doesn't do the gig. He doesn't get into the outfit and actually show up and suit up and do the little stuff that I know from experience over and over and over again. The little things that Benny taught me: come to meetings, don't drink, read the big book, work with another alcoholic. And those are those funny kinds of things you think, well, it's so simple. Surely I'll get to a point where I can not have to do that. But then you get to, you know, I was talking with my friend who is my sponsor now. We sponsor each other, and we were laughing about the fact that, well, on the one hand, we're friends, on the other hand, we're sponsors. And like when I'll call him and we'll talk, he'll say, is this friends or sponsor? And, you know, and I'll say, no, it's just regular stuff. It's just this. But I'm always amazed that I didn't ever think that whoever expected to see this much time gone by, you know, all of a sudden I look down and I'm wearing the chassis out. You know, I'm the robotic man. You know, all of these. I'm full of racing Dacron, fast and slick. I've got a split fire ignition. You know, it's one of those things where they tried to whittle me down in the war. They tried to whittle me down after I showed up here, and one of there's a friend in the back, one of the operations where they were whittling on me to patch an aneurysm that I didn't know I had. And when I woke up, here was this great drawing, and it just said, "Benny's God is here." And, you know, that was a startling kind of statement, and I remembered, oh yeah, that's exactly the way this thing's work. You know, whether I call it Benny's God, Big Amigo, whoever and however I choose to call that force is in operation. And those little funny angels that, and I've noticed they don't hang out with people that aren't in here. You know, I'll see, bless their little hearts, regular people scampering around out there in the world, and they're just on their own, man. They're on their own. And then I look around at, you know, this room by all rights, by odds, should be empty. This should, you know, and yet here we are. We've beaten those odds in a funny kind of way, and for whatever reason, we end up here. And for whatever reason, those little angels lead us back in here for reasons that are more is always revealed. You know, that's the thing that really kind of tickles me, because now then, well, one good thing about being an old fart, you don't give a shit anymore. You know, you want to fart in public, it's okay. You know, you want to tell somebody how it hangs, this is okay. And it's really astounding to be this far down the road. I was always laughing about, I'll never make it to 32. 32 is when I got sober, and I celebrated 33 years sober this last March, Texas Independence Day. I didn't know that at the time. When my wife and I got married, we had a party down, I was living on Kenny Avenue. All these kids from all these people that are there all show up. Well, at about the time that they start shooting off the Texas Independence fireworks, I walk by and say, "Okay, guys, my fireworks are fixing to start." And about that time, all hell breaks loose down on the river. And all these kids thought that was fireworks for me. You know? This is good, I'll take it. You know, anything to do. But I never thought I would. First 32 years I spent crazy and drunk, and then this last 32 years has been a real adventure on how we live, how we get to do what we want to do, all those little heart tugs that I had about the stuff that I wanted to do with my life, finally able to do it, mainly keeping in the presence of this. This is what always keeps me back and running on the right track. You know, I see so many friends in the room that go way, way back. And that's important glue, you know. I mean, Delta Walker here it's important to have friends that really keep all of the memories fresh and green, and it's a good place to run with. You know, I'm always laughing about my choice of companions. My grandparents raised me, and they were always worried about the people I was running with. And we're it. We're the kind of people they were warning me against. I finally found my outfit, my group that I feel perfectly comfortable with. I'm glad all you guys showed up here tonight. You sure kept me sober. And I think I'll keep coming back, and I'll look for you guys too. Little angels on your shoulder.